Today, I'm joined by James Higgins, who is currently the CIO of Barclays UK Business Bank. I've known James for over 6 years and I've followed his impressive career journey through that time period. He's got a fantastic track record of leading both within fintech and banking, and I'm looking forward to hearing his stories today. James, welcome to the pod.
Thank you very much. Good to see you, Luke.
We were just saying that we've known each other for a while now, and it's been fascinating to see how you've grown in your career through the last kind of 5-6 years. And I guess the first question that I wanted to ask was, what makes you unique as a leader?
Good question. And I think one of the important things as we're all going through our careers is trying to figure out what our brand is, right? And I don't think I ever could have answered that question consciously in the early years, but I think what emerged quite early on I recognised was my first job was I was in the army, commissioned into the British Army. And after spending some time in the army, loving it, learning a load of skills, leadership included, then I fell into banking and quite quickly realised that I was different in that management layer to a lot of people who joined banks as grads. And that worked for me. And I hope that it worked for some of the people that I was leading and managing. And I started to build my brand around what makes me different, what can I bring that's unique. And so it was all about searching out skills, experiences that were going to make me different in any given context. And I'd say that's really what I've tried to do throughout my career, mainly because that's what motivates me, is bringing new perspectives.
And when you say bringing new perspectives, can you maybe give us an example of what you mean by that? Is it about bringing new perspectives to individuals, which then changes their mindset or enables them to unlock something? Or is it more about, from a commercial standpoint, bringing new perspectives?
I think it's probably more focused on new perspectives from a people perspective, but also from an organizational perspective and how to do things. I've definitely learned throughout my career that, I've spent time in pretty commercial-based roles, but I don't think that's where I enjoy life. I enjoy getting out of bed and delivering things, whether it's software, whether it's operational results. That's what motivates me. So I think it's all been about how do you unlock people in a better way, in a different way. And that was where I started when I took my first job in banking. That was really what the ask of my leadership, my bosses was we've got a bit of a challenge in terms of motivating really bright people and getting them to do their best. So can you bring us a different perspective? So that's definitely been a theme. And then another theme is making sure that we move from idea and talk to actually we've got something working over there that the customer values. So, let's get things done. Let's take action rather than have circular conversation.
Very good. And can you maybe give us an idea of what your role is now and what you're accountable for?
So I'm CIO for business banking within Barclays UK. So I am accountable for all of technology for business banking. So we build the customer journeys, the capabilities and the platforms that support our business banking teams on the front line, working with our customers, supporting our customers through their growth journeys.
Excellent. And look, that's a really exciting space right now. There's so much change happening in the business banking market, right? I think in the UK in particular, we're trying to really become a home for SME businesses that are scaling. So I can see the excitement there. But what made you join the organisation, given that you only joined last year, right? So what made you take that role?
Two things. One, I guess, was a push factor from me. I'd spent 12 years in banking and then stepped away for 7 years to work in a couple of different fintechs. So I come back to my point about having a new perspective. 7 years in fintech, from startup through to Series C scale-up business. You learn a lot and you have a whole host of experiences, which means that my 12 years prior in banking, I have new thoughts and ideas on how that can be done. So I thought that it would be a great opportunity to go back into the banking sector and apply some of that learning. And the second was a pull. The opportunity to, you just reference, the UK SME market, and I know it's an often used phrase, but that is the lifeblood of this economy. So to go and support the technology that underpins all of that, lead the team that's delivering that for nearly 1 million business banking customers, and have the privilege of leading all of that talent that's working on such an important task, an important challenge, an important opportunity, is one of those that comes along once, maybe a few times in your career, and you say, wow, that's something that I can't turn down.
Very cool. Big job.
Big job.
But it sounds like you're getting on with it and making things happen. You talked about the organisation there. How big is that organisation?
My part of the organisation, about 600 people, about up to 1 million business banking customers.
Cool, amazing. And so when you look at that 600-person organisation, how do you get 600 people aligned to a single vision or your vision?
I think I've been really fortunate since I arrived over the 12 months that we've got a really strong vision, mission, strategy in Barclays Business Banking. So, all the kudos goes to the business leaders on the business side for that. I've stepped into a part of the organization where it's very vision, mission oriented. Then aligning the technology teams behind that. I'd say my first 12 months, one of the biggest things that I've been looking at, that I've been really focused on, is making sure that I've got the right leadership team around me that can translate the vision and the mission to all of our practitioners in technology. So it's about getting the right leadership team who enjoy working together, who want to be part of the team with their peers, who buy into the vision and the mission and genuinely buy into it, and have unique perspectives on how we're going to deliver on it from a technology perspective.
When you build that leadership team, are you hiring for specific roles? Are you basing that on what people have done previously and performance in previous roles? Or how do you go about aligning that team to make sure that they're going to deliver on what you need them to deliver on?
Obviously, all of us as leaders have a structure that which we're going to populate in terms of our team. But my view is you can't be too rigid about defining that up front and then going and looking for individuals to sit in very prescriptive roles. I take the view that it's better to hire for talent. So go out and find top talent in the market who've got really interesting, relevant experiences, insights, and perspectives. Hire for talent, bring them in, get the right people around the table, make sure that it's a team that functions well as a unit. Worry about that first rather than the specific roles, responsibilities, and putting job titles against it. So hire for talent and then figure it out around the table. And I brought some new people into the leadership organization, and we took this approach, and part of it is through the recruitment process, through trying to attract the right people, being really open about what they're walking into, what your expectations are, and having a really in-depth conversation through that process to get their views on, well, how would you solve this problem? I've got challenges here, I've got opportunities. What's your view on this? Hire for that talent, and then they will tell you where they can add the most value. Do it in a considered way over time. I've not rushed that, because I think that's the first step.
Hire slow, fire fast, as they say, right? And then once you bring them together, your role becomes the director of that group, the person that mediates across the group and make sure that you're driving consensus continuously. Or can you give us a view on how you actually work with that team on a day-to-day basis?
I think today, in 2025, the role of leadership in technology is, yes, to bring the team together, to make sure that there's a strong and compelling vision, that we're all moving towards it, to get the right people in place. But if you expect as a technology leader to be able to avoid diving into the detail, then you're not going to succeed. So actually, a lot of my role is getting hands-on solving the complex problems. Because sometimes in a large organization like a tier one bank, and the complex problems are not just technical in nature, they're not just people related, but they can be organizational in nature. That's not a bad thing. It's just a reflection that Barclays employs tens of thousands of people. And so your job is to understand the problems that the teams are facing, understand the problems that the customers see or the opportunities that the customers have that you want to deliver for. Be part of solving the problem. Some of my favorite times in my job is stood around a whiteboard with 2 or 3 people solving a problem, and then taking my share of the actions to go and solve some of the organizational blockers or problems to get things out of the way so that the people can get on and do their work. But equally, as you say, a lot of it is making sure that by solving those problems today and tomorrow, we're still moving towards the state that we want to be in 3 months' time and 12 months' time and 3 years' time.
How do you continuously drive that kind of that end goal, right? Because like you say, a lot of the things that you're going to be doing day to day are very tactical. I imagine a big percentage of your job right now is spent on the tactical issues, as most leaders are.
Yeah, but I think we're pretty good within our organization. And again, I have a very strong relationship with the chief product officer for business banking. We talk multiple times per week, if not daily sometimes. It's always anchoring the work and making sure you've got visibility of the work, and everybody at every level's got visibility of the work and traceability to the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, and making sure that you're moving forward on a day-to-day basis, but that actually you're moving the needle. So again, the other facet of today's technology leadership, right, is data-driven. So if you're gone are the days where you can make decisions purely on gut feel and, well, it's worked like this before, because things change so fast now. The pace of change is ever increasing as we know. So you've got to be anchored on the data. Well, the data, those feedback loops are telling me that this particular change for the customer didn't yield the results we expected. So what's the next version? Or this particular change that I made in the organization, my colleague feedback is telling me that people don't like it. Why not? How are we going to make sure that they're engaged better by tweaking whatever we've done to change the operating model or the colleague experience?
Right. And inevitably, sometimes people are going to have spent a lot of time and effort and poured a lot of calories into building those tools, those processes, those outcomes for the customer. I imagine it's quite difficult sometimes to have those conversations to then do the fast fail approach, where you shut stuff down and you go back to the drawing board.
It can be, but I think it's cultural, isn't it?
Yeah.
And working in smaller organizations, I can't claim to be an original thinker, but I've read a whole bunch of stuff. And one of the old favorites, the lean startup, I'd say my favorite concept in that is innovation accounting. So I still talk about it now in this role with feature teams when I'm talking to them. And if you run into that problem of, well, I appreciate you spent a lot of time building this, but the results aren't what we expected, and the feedback loop tells us we need to do something different, you should account for that on your mental or your team balance sheet somewhere. Account for the innovation that you processed. The fact that it didn't work doesn't matter, because it's still a learning. You should account for the learning on the balance sheet, on that mental balance sheet. And I think that's a cultural, it's a mentality thing. But I actually think engineers are broadly okay with customers not liking what they've built, as long as they've got the tools, the DevX, to be able to evolve that, iterate upon it really quickly.
So when you think about your team, and maybe you go down 1 layer, 2 layers, 3 layers, what do you think about in terms of their core responsibilities for driving culture? How do they ensure that they are driving the culture in the right way based on your expectations?
I was actually having this conversation just yesterday with my team about allegiance and where your primary allegiances need to lie. So part of making sure the culture permeates the organization, in my opinion, is the leadership team needs to wake up every day and their primary allegiance needs to be to the leadership team. And what I mean by that is, one of my leadership team may be responsible for the solution architecture community of practice, or delivering a particular pillar related to lending products for our customers, or engineering community of practice. And they will have an allegiance to those people that sit in their area. But my ask of them is that their primary allegiance is to the other people sat around the leadership table. Because if that leadership team is not aligned, and we're not on the same page, and we're not either succeeding or failing collectively, then the whole thing is going to fall apart. It won't work.
Yeah.
And then I expect that they would go and have a conversation with their own leadership teams and say, I need all of you waking up every morning, and whether you're an engineering lead sat in a feature team, or you're an engineering manager or an engineering director, your primary allegiance is to whatever team they're then leading, that leadership team that they're sat around as well. And I don't think that detracts from the servant leader model. I actually think it enhances it and it complements it, because what you're doing is you're creating the circumstances whereby everybody is aligned across the functions or the groups of the organization, and therefore everybody in different parts of the organization is getting the same message, right? They're aligned to the same vision, the same practices, the same messages. And that drives consistency, it drives understanding, it drives common goals. People are more inclined to say, well, I want to work with these people because they're talking the same language. We're after the same thing.
Of course. And you've mentioned it there. I mean, it's fascinating, right? Hard to do, I imagine, because most people think about servant leadership as a downward looking thing. right? Where you're actually supporting the teams underneath and you're becoming a servant to those as the leader, right? But you're almost flipping that on its head to a certain extent. So how, in practice, how do you get those peer groups aligned on a mission? Is that about the words that you use?
I think you're right. It's probably a slightly different take on the servant leader model. But I do think that you have to ask the question, are you adequately serving the interests of the people doing the work if those teams, those horizontals aren't aligned? And then your question was, how do you practically get them
Together.
Yeah. So I think if we go back to the talent approach, hiring for talent. So hiring for talent is not just people with unique perspectives and experiences. It's people with different perspectives and experiences to me, to the other people around the leadership table. And I think part of it is accepting that you're going to have a whole load of difficult, interesting, challenging conversations when you've got that neurodiversity around the table. It's the right thing to do. We all know it's the right thing to do. But it does create a circumstance where there's going to be a lot of debate. And it comes back to allegiance to that team. If we've got the culture, the circumstance where people trust each other, they want to be working together, they get on, and they accept that people are challenging and bringing different perspectives to the table because it's the right thing to do and they've got different experiences, then you can have those difficult conversations. But you should expect it to be challenging. And if it's not, then it's not working. If you're all, furiously agreeing every time. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear you say it, because I can picture it in my own experiences, either building leadership teams or having a leadership team myself. And it's really hard, isn't it, to actually do it day in, day out, because at certain points you'll be completely aligned and everybody will be kind of on the same journey, even if you've got different views on how to get to the outcome. Whereas at other times it's slightly more difficult to find that alignment, I suppose, especially when you're going through a transformation.
Yeah, I think that's right. And part of it comes to, once you get that model working, it's then about creating the frameworks and the structures that people can operate safely within.
Yeah.
Right. This is how you get people bought in, as you say, these are the guardrails and the confines in which you can operate. Here's my intent. Here is the intent of the leadership above me. Mm-hmm. Get understanding around that, but then devolve the decision making to the lowest level possible within those confines and those guardrails. That's what motivates people. People don't want prescriptions about what they should be working on and how they should be working on it. They want vision, they want structure, they want things to move quickly and for blockers to be removed. But then they want the ability to do their best work and actually figure out complex problems.
Yeah, and you can see how passionate you are about this, right? Where does it go wrong? Where have you seen it not work in the past?
There's two ways which this devolved leadership and autonomy can go wrong. Number one, you don't create the structure and the guardrails. Because what happens if you don't create the structure and the guardrails? We can talk about concepts such as fail fast. But if you've not put any parameters around how people should operate and where they should be operating, they might go off and do something completely bonkers. And then they're not failing in a way that they feel safe to do so in the future. So you need those confines. And I think this is a concept that really, for me, was baselined when I was in the military, because the military talks about mission command, which is, so if I'm leading a unit at whatever level, then I need to understand what my 1-up and 2-up commander's intent is. I need to understand what the limits of my objective are, and then how I get to the end result is for me to determine. But it's always clear in terms of what the limits are, what the no-goes are, and those guardrails are in place. And I think it's the same in any organization, whether it's military, whether it's operations, whether it's a retailer or software engineering in this case. It's about saying to our teams, here's where I want you to get to. Here's some of the confines you need to operate in. The rest is up to you, figure it out. Because then if they get it wrong, at least they've done it in the confines that you believe are going to be safe to do so.
Yeah.
And therefore they have the psychological safety to go, well, we didn't get it right, but I'm okay to go again and fail again because I'm being encouraged to move fast and to push the boundaries.
Right. And that just helps people to grow and develop themselves, right?
Yeah.
Which is what it's all about.
Absolutely.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. And so when you think about your own journey into kind of leadership, obviously we've talked a little bit about the military and that being kind of the foundational experience for you. How have you continuously developed yourself? How have you continuously moved your own skill set forward?
So I think one of the best pieces of advice that I got from a previous boss when we were talking about my career path was we were having a long chat. And it got to the point where he said, when you boil it all down though, James, figure out what's going to get you out of bed in the morning. Like what's really going to motivate you to jump out of bed in the morning rather than, the alarm goes off and you snooze 3 times. And that's what's guided my career thinking to the extent that I've done the career planning and thinking. I think as you go through, then you do it a lot more. But in the early days, I really hung on to that and said, well, actually, it's the breadth of experiences that are motivating me. So I sought those out. So that was kind of the foundation as to how I planned my career.
So you're basically looking for opportunities to develop yourself in your career moves, not necessarily moving for title or money or anything else.
Yeah, so I think that was the best piece of advice that I was given. The worst misstep I ever made was moving for money, because it never works out in the medium term if you don't enjoy what you're doing and you're getting out of bed for. Right. But the other piece is, we talked earlier about thinking more consciously as you go along about your brand and where you can add value. But sometimes being able to add value in the future is about taking a role that you think, well, that's really quite different. And so when I worked in fintech, one of the organizations I went to work at was deliberately seeking out top engineering talent in the market, like the top 10%. And the opportunity to go and work with those kind of people solving massive problems was really quite illuminating. The speed with which we moved through those problems, the collaborative culture, but also the opportunity to work on what I still regard as one of the best tech stacks that I've been exposed to was a real education. And of course, it was all built from greenfield first principles. So then coming into a bank and having that experience of what good really can look like is an example of where I took a move for not just for the value I could add to the organization, but for the education and the learning that I could take out of that education was really quite significant.
Yeah. So many people don't do that as well, right? Why do you think that is? Have you got a view on that?
Sometimes I think people are too eager to climb the ladder, and I get it, right? We all want to progress. We all want to move up and feel like our efforts are being rewarded with achievement and success. So I think that's a factor. Mention the money bit, which is never a good way to drive your career, but it happens. And then I think the third thing is that people sometimes struggle to understand the difference between roles and skills. So by doing a particular role, you don't have to take a role that's the next level in that sort of discipline or even in that organization. You have to think more, be more reflective about, well, what were the skills that I gathered by doing that role and how could I apply them in different ways? So some of the people I've recruited into my team in senior positions have never touched banking. And the reason that I recruited them was we've got a lot of people who are incredibly clued in about our organization, about the market, about our customers, about the regulation. But we needed people who've worked in very different engineering type organizations where the engineering culture is different. So just because you've worked on food delivery or worked for a big tech like Amazon, absolutely applicable skills to financial services in an engineering context. And that's a really basic example, right? But yeah. I think it can be much broader than that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We talk a lot about the difference between performance and potential. And I think most organizations historically have always promoted people based on performance rather than potential. And then what you tend to end up with is individuals getting stuck at a certain point in their career, and they may have enormous potential to do a role elsewhere in the organization that doesn't involve a upwards move just to take on more responsibility or take on their boss's job, right? I think historically, organizational structures haven't necessarily allowed for those moves. And in fact, even the example that you just used, I think historically banks haven't necessarily gone and hired from a food delivery business, right? But what's the benefit of doing that?
Comes back to, well, number one, that neurodiversity around the table. Secondly, you've got people that are focused on the thing they're really good at. Because I think that it's hard enough in life trying to reach your potential in the thing that you're really good and talented at without somebody saying, yeah, but you need to have all these other things as well. So we've had some really senior engineers who, frankly, are just amazing at software engineering, developing software engineering teams and raising the bar in terms of the quality of our code and our products. Why wouldn't I want that skill, even if it doesn't have any experience or exposure previously to banking? And I think potential's going to be equally as important as we progress over the coming years, because you talked about performance and potential, and performance is really important. But I was listening to a podcast a couple of days ago, and Microsoft reckon that 30% of their code is being written by AI now.
Right.
So the thought that triggered is, again, it points to the pace of change. But if 30% of code in Microsoft is being written by AI, how much is going to be written by AI in 3 years' time?
Right.
And therefore, what does it mean in terms of what are the roles that people are going to be performing? Well, the roles are going to be very different. And therefore, you can't rely on previous performance alone. You've got to think about skills and potential.
Right.
Because people's ability to perform roles that we haven't even thought about yet is all going to be based around potential, because by definition, they don't exist. They can't have performed in those roles yet.
Exactly that. And I think there's another crazy stat, which is like over 25% of technology roles become obsolete every year, right? As in the skill set demanded in that role evolves at such a pace that the person doing it is no longer qualified to perform in the role. And that's a crazy thing to think about at an enterprise level. And like you say, there is no way that things can be based on performance only in today's world. Yet we see that it's still the case in many organizations. I think it's changing, which is a good thing. And so when you talk about devolving the responsibility down to the teams, have you got an example of where that's led to some really specific outcomes that have been fantastic for you or for the organization or for, in fact, the customer?
I'll give you a current example, and then maybe we'll go back in time a little bit. One of the things that we're doing within Barclays is orientating ourselves around customer obsession. We're structuring a lot of our teams around what we call customer journeys. And what I'm seeing is where the feature teams, and we're talking feature team level, are focused on a customer journey rather than business outcomes.
Right.
Then what you see is outsized results, right? Because it comes back to that devolved accountability. You as a team, as a unit, are accountable for not just delivering output in terms of working software, but adding value to the customer, remediating pain and friction that customer experiences, and capitalizing on the opportunities that the customer wants to take advantage of. And we're already seeing that teams that operate like that have outsized results. And I think when I go back to my time at BMI Mellon, and we were building a platform as part of our entrance into Chaps, the direct clearer. Now, the timelines were defined, and at the time, adoption of agile ways of working within banks was limited versus how it is now. Right. But we went all in on this, and actually some of the decisions that were being made about a system which was going to manage intraday liquidity for a tier one bank, doing direct clearing in sterling, were within a feature team type construct. And that's still one of the platforms, one of the outcomes, one of the deliverables that I've been part of that I'm most proud of, because
Amazing.
We did it in such a short time span in a way of working that was all based around autonomous self-organizing teams, making decisions, moving fast, iterating, having the guardrails in place to fail fast and learn and move on. It was an absolutely quality result, both for the bank, but from for all of the people involved as well.
Of course. It's almost like it's innovation before its time, right? The way of working and the approach is probably at that moment, like you say, it was new, it was exciting, and not many people were doing it. And now everybody's got a version of this happening in their organization, right? At whatever level. And now when you look forward, what do you think are the most exciting things that are on the horizon? And what are you personally most excited about? You could talk about it from a technology standpoint. You could talk about it from a people standpoint, organization standpoint. Probably how technology is driving change into organizations would probably be one way to look at it. I'm thinking about the stuff that we were just talking about as well, around like if 30% of Microsoft code is being written by AI, is that exciting or does that scare you, do you think?
I think one of the most exciting conundrums that we need to wrestle with is what is the next boundary for leadership that needs to be pushed, broken through in terms of how humans and automation are going to interact in the future? I think that's a big question. We touched on it earlier when we were discussing how much code in different organizations is being written by AI. And that poses quite an interesting opportunity, I think, to redefine what some of our people are going to be doing and how they add value. And maybe it's, well, in my opinion, it's a massive opportunity because there's still huge problems or opportunities across financial services from a business perspective, from a people perspective, from a technology perspective, right? So if 30% or 50% of your code is being written by AI, what does that mean in terms of, the challenge of the incumbents to compete with the neobanks in terms of modernizing the stack? In theory, it should be significant, right? Because you can spin up sidecar type solutions, propositions far quicker. You can learn from that and you can move on. And ultimately, it must mean that some of the newer banks are actually going to start to face into legacy challenges of their own. So perhaps it levels the playing field. I think from a people perspective, it means that everybody's got a list of challenges or opportunities that they never get to, right? Because they're either too big or too complex, or there isn't enough time in the day, or maybe those things get opened up. And that can only be good from a customer perspective, because if we're solving for the big opportunities, then the customers should benefit from that as well.
Right. That's fascinating. I guess from a leadership perspective as well, it means there's more emphasis on being as close to the detail as possible on a regular basis, which again is a sort of kind of a time management thing, like you just alluded to, right? It's how do you zero in on all the detail and go right down to the grassroots and then 10,000 feet within the same day? Do you have that challenge right now? How do you tackle that?
Yeah, I think all of us do. Do you remember that YouTube video of I think it was Bill Gates and Warren Buffett having a conversation?
Right, yeah.
And Bill Gates asked Warren Buffett to get out his diary, and it's blank. And he couldn't believe it. He said, why have you got nothing in your diary? He said, because it's no secret, I'm incredibly wealthy. The only thing that I think I cannot buy is time. Therefore, time is the most precious thing to me. And it's the last thing that I give away without thought. I watched that and I thought, that's really interesting, because all of us throughout our careers, we're constantly wrestling with there just isn't enough hours in the day. But actually there are enough hours in the day if you think about, well, what really matters? And it all comes down to, well, what matters to my colleagues, the people that I'm working with? What matters to the customers? And what matters in terms of, in my role, the technology estate? And I would say it's in that order. So sometimes people say, always put the customer first. I've always had the view, you put your people first, you put your colleagues first, the people who you're leading first, because without them, you've got no chance with the customer whatsoever. So if you make sure that they're in a good place and they're doing the right things and everybody's prioritizing the customer, then the customer bit follows. It's a very close second.
Yeah.
Then back to your point about managing that time, I think we all fall into the trap sometimes. Sometimes I can get to the end of a week and say, wow, it was almost quite a transactional week, jumping from meeting to meeting, appointment to appointment. Therefore, here's a list of stuff that really matters to people or customer or the technology plan that we're trying to strategically deliver against. I need some dedicated time to that. And the way I think about this is, and it flows into your personal life as well, right?
Cool.
Whatever you're doing, if it's important, if it's the most important thing, don't feel guilty about the things you're not doing. You've built a business up, Luke, and I'm sure you feel this across your work life and your personal life, is sometimes I'm not spending enough time with the kids.
Right.
And I guess the way that I rationalize that is, whatever you're doing right now, do it as well as you possibly can. Don't feel guilty about what you're not doing, because when you get to spend time with the kids, make sure you're fully in it. And then don't feel guilty about the fact you're not checking your emails or you're not doing the work that you didn't get finished and what have you.
Yeah, it's a muscle that you got to build and develop, though, isn't it? It's hard to do, right?
Yeah.
And I love that concept of the kind of the blank diary. I find it difficult to hold that time it just disappears. And then all of a sudden you're talking about how busy you are rather than how productive you are, right? And you're measuring the wrong things, which is never a good thing. But do you have any practical advice around how you actually hold that space and make sure that you are prioritizing the right things on a regular basis?
Tactically, then one of the things that I do is on a Friday, before I close the laptop, then I look at the diary for the week ahead. And any meeting that's got more than 5 people in it, if it's come from somebody else, if there's 3 of your team in there, do you really need to be there? So I look at meeting size. I want other people to be really disciplined about demands they place on my time. Within Barclays UK, the Exco has been talking a lot about a book called The Friction Project recently. And one of the concepts in this book talks about addition sickness. So people's default is always to add, right? So you get this addition sickness where you keep adding things into an organization. And to the point on time management, sometimes when you're thinking about a problem or an opportunity, you go, well, I need to schedule a meeting to talk to a bunch of people about that. Do you, though? Why are you scheduling that? Is it to discuss it? Is it to reach a decision, an outcome? So we've got to back away from this addition sickness and go, actually, there's something that I can do before I need to bring other people in. And I think it's been a really interesting read and a really interesting concept to think about. When we go back to talking about recruitment and building teams, I genuinely can't think of many occasions in my work where adding more people into a team solved the complex problem, right? Because it's that addition sickness. It's, well, we're not going fast enough. We must need more people. Yeah. Or we're really not solving this thing. This thing still doesn't work. We must need more people, or we must need different people.
Right.
Probably not.
But you could replace more or different with the right, and actually you get to the right outcome, right? Sometimes there is a need for a different type of skill set or mindset, and that can really help you accelerate, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And again, back to our discussion about roles and skills, a different type of skill set doesn't necessarily mean that you need to replace all the people, because there might be people doing a role that have a skill set that they can apply in a different way or to a different area.
Leverage their potential, not their performance.
That's hugely valuable to an organization.
Right.
We just need to leverage their skills in a different way. But of course, that means bringing in new and fresh talent, and some level of natural attrition. It's well documented is the right thing for an organization to keep those fresh ideas coming through.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's fascinating to hear you talk about the time management piece as well, right? I think there's a common view that most executives are just kind of back to back all day, every day, and that is what is expected of you as an executive running an organization. But what you're saying is actually there are other ways that you should be thinking about this, right? And it kind of comes back to the point that you were saying before. If your team and your subordinates and their subordinates really understand a level above and a level above that, what the intent is and what the priorities are, then actually holding that time should become fairly easy, right?
Should be.
Not always the case, but
not always.
Okay, cool. So I'm just going to end this conversation then with some quick fire questions. I think we've got a bit of time left. So I've got a list here that I wanted to go through. So first of all, what is the best piece of career advice that you've ever received?
Whatever you're doing, make sure it's the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning.
Perfect.
That you enjoy. Work on what motivates you, what you enjoy. Life's too short.
And have you, just to dig into that a little bit more, have you seen that in periods of time where that's not been the case for you, and how have you dealt with that?
I have, yeah. I've definitely taken roles for sometimes the right reasons, sometimes the wrong reasons, on a couple of occasions, and thought, that's just not motivating me to get out of bed in the morning. Therefore, I need to change it in a considered way.
Perfect. And is there a single kind of habit or mindset shift that you've had at any point in your career that's really changed things for you?
So I have this habit around prioritizing the things that are difficult to do, or there's stuff in everyone's job that you don't enjoy doing. And it's really basic, but I ask myself the question a couple of times a day. So I do it first thing when I get up, and I say, what does 12 o'clock midday James want you to have achieved?
Love that.
And then at 12 o'clock, I ask myself the same question, what does 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. James want you to have achieved? And it's just a habit that I have, which is looking forwards and going, well, how do I want to feel about my day so far at midday? And then how do I want to feel about my day at the end of the day? What do I need to do, or what do I need to think about, or who do I need to go and work with in order to feel like that? Go and do that.
And what percentage of the time do you think you hit your goal?
Oh, that's a great question. Let's say 75%.
Wow.
I'm going glass half full.
That's amazing. And have you seen that increase over time?
That's not necessarily saying that I delivered or achieved the goal in terms of the outcome that I set out, but it's how often do I actually commit to doing the thing that I know I need to do in order that me in the future is going to say, well, even if we didn't solve the problem, at least you went at it hard.
You made some
today.
progress. Yeah.
Then, 3/4 of the time.
Amazing. Very good. What's one thing that you've learned about leading people that you didn't expect?
I'd say the most positive piece is the things that people will do for each other when the chips are down, when you've gone through and the teams have formed themselves into the kind of units that we've been talking about, are astonishing. So the thing I've learned probably is that people will surprise you every single day, every single week about what they're capable of in a really good way. And
then that becomes a feedback loop to them, right? And a flywheel of positive interaction and improvement and progression, I guess.
Yeah.
Amazing. Is there a mistake that you've made that you'll never repeat?
Yes. Earlier in my career, like early in my banking days, then I'd say I was directly responsible based on some of my management or leadership actions and dropping the ball for a significant financial loss. I won't repeat that type of mistake. And basically I'd shortcutted process. I never have and will repeat that kind of shortcutting approach in the future. I'll never forget what my boss said to me at the time. And it was something along the lines of, and I've heard it quoted somewhere else, but his point was along the lines of this lesson. There'd been a financial loss, and I said, look, I was utterly apologetic, and I'm thinking, I'm going to get thrown out. He said, why would I throw you out? He said, I've just spent an absolute fortune educating you what not to do.
Amazing. Never waste a good crisis, right?
Absolutely.
How will it make you feel?
Pretty inspired in terms of, as you go through life and you work for people, that's the kind of person I want to be as a leader.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Interesting. And it's a lesson that you've taken with you. So obviously, it works, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's really cool. I love that. What are you most proud of? What's your proudest success to date?
I think my proudest success probably relates to the people that I've worked with, who I've seen develop into quite remarkable human beings. And I don't say I'm proud of that because I'm taking the credit, but maybe in some small way, my influence helped. But maybe in a large way, the teams that we were part of was part of who these people have become. So you're kind of a product of the environments you've worked in. And if I was part of creating those environments, then it's a bit like life, isn't it? I think most of us would say, what's your proudest achievement in life? Well, mine in life is my family, right? And, the good, incredible humans that they are. And that's not because of me, but, hopefully I've been part of shaping that in the same way that they've been part of shaping who I am.
You create an environment, don't you? And then the environment creates the people. And I think it's your point earlier around it being about the people, then the customer.
Yeah.
And then the technology stack. But that really resonates with me. I think as we set out our plans for our business, when we first founded the business, it was always all about the people, small unit, high impact people, let's just go for it. I think over time, you kind of evolve your thinking to be a bit more customer centric. And sometimes that impacts the people.
Yeah.
And I think that probably comes back to the point I made earlier around when you're in a transformation, sometimes you've got the really close-knit team, sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to drive that, right? But actually having the people centre to everything at every point probably gets rid of some of those ebbs and flows, I suspect. That's really cool. I love that advice personally. Okay, a couple more for you. Finish the sentence. I wouldn't have achieved what I have in my career without...
Exercise.
Interesting.
4 times a week, get up, work out, do some exercise. When I don't do it, I'm less effective.
Wow.
I can't think straight unless I'm physically exerting multiple times a week.
Right.
Yeah. It's really important. I know it's probably not the direction that people would take in answer to that question, but it's one of those things that I've got to have.
I mean, it's a common theme in these conversations. I think,
Is it?
yeah, regularly it's the same answer. And, we've had lots of discussion around how do you actually schedule that into your diary, right? And there are individuals that have been on the podcast that have talked about, in fact, Martin Atkinson, who's in a similar role to you at Lloyd's, he actually talked specifically about the fact that this is the one rock that he gives to his EA every week and says, right, my rock is my exercise, everything else fits around that. And he drives that into the organisation as well. And he says that has an outsized impact on the performance of the organisation as a whole.
Interesting.
It is, isn't it? And I mean, look, it's the same for me, right? I don't think I could survive without it. You kind of brings you back to the mindset that you need to be in when you're going about your day to day.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, very good. Okay. What's one question people should ask themselves more often when they're thinking about their careers?
I think the one question people should ask themselves more often in their careers is, what was my part in that, right? Success, failure, that sort of self-reflection is really important to say, actually, that was a success, but was it, what did I really contribute? Or if it was a failure, actually, is that on me? I guess it comes down to, not deflecting and standing up, taking the points, but also taking the hits as well, making sure that you reflect on both of those, so that, because that's where the learning comes from, right?
It's the whole, you've got to take accountability. It can never be somebody else's fault, right?
Yeah.
Because that's the only way you learn.
I think so. Yeah.
Very
And
good.
I think the other thing is, are you devoting enough time to self-development, right? I mentioned earlier, I'm not sure the vast majority of us come up with truly original thinking on a daily basis. So where are you getting your ideas from? Where are you getting your insights from? So that probably comes back to the other question. What couldn't I have lived without within my career? It's reading, podcasts. There's some real gems in there, right? That you can't live without.
Yeah, absolutely. And the amount of books I've got on the shelf at home where they've just got like every other page folded down. And those are things that I always go back to, right? And again, it kind of shapes how you do your job, right?
Yeah.
And especially how you lead people, I think.
Definitely. And sometimes it's not the books you'd expect, is it?
No.
Right? If I went through a list of my favorites, some of them are completely unrelated to the business I work in, or even, not even related to technology. I read again recently, Shoe Dog, Phil Knight.
Yeah.
Love that. It's all about, kind of people's motivation, tenacity.
Yeah.
Dealing with adversity, having vision.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Okay, cool. And so what would you say your favourite business book is? What's your number one recommendation?
Ooh, right. I'm gonna go with a short list, and then I'll see if I can narrow it down. So I love Shoe Dog. I think it's fantastic. I love The Lean Startup because it was very formative for me. I also really recently I read Build, Tony Fadell.
Yeah.
Very sort of product-centric thinking. I also love The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, another sort of one that's been around a while.
Right.
And then I think, because I also like reading a lot of history, so a lot of my favorites are things like how Google works and Working Backwards by Amazon, big tech stories of how they work. I'm not doing a very good job at narrowing it down. I'm just expanding it a little bit.
No, but look, that is effectively my reading list. I've just gone through Working Backwards again, actually. I love some of the concepts from that book. In fact, like the PR FAQ thing, I really buy into that.
Write a press release.
Yeah.
It's these kind of concepts, once you start doing them, it's works so well for technology teams when we get back to talking about vision and all the rest of it. Traceability.
Yeah, absolutely. It just clarifies your thinking, right? And finally, what do you wish you knew at the start of your career that you know now?
At the start of my career, what I wish I'd known is, whatever it is, wherever you think you're going, you're probably never going to get there, right? We've talked about leadership. I think the day you think you've cracked it, you've sort of lost understanding of what it's really all about. We've talked about technology. The day you think you've mastered it, again, you've lost sight of what it's really all about. And so I think at the start of our careers, a lot of us go, well, where I'm going, where I want to get to is here. And now I'm of the mindset, I don't know where I'm going to end up, but, all aspects of this career, it's a constant path of learning, exploration, trying, failing, succeeding.
Love it, yeah. And it's a constant evolution, right? It's funny, as a business owner and founder, I often get asked the question, what's your end goal? And we haven't really got an end goal per se. We've got an objective and we've got a vision, but we don't have a flag that's planted somewhere. It's like as soon as we get to that, we've succeeded, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't really work like that.
It's what's the saying? Can't remember who it comes from. You never achieve perfection,
right,
but along the way you can definitely achieve excellence. And I think that's good for any business as a motivation, and therefore good for all the people within that business.
Love it. Thank you very much. So James, obviously you're on a recruitment drive at the moment, trying to bring the right people into the organisation to really help you achieve your mission as a business. How would you describe those opportunities and what's most exciting about that?
So at the moment, we are very much open for business in advanced engineering circles to find and bring in and work with the best talent in the market. And I think it's a massive and an exciting opportunity for people who are motivated to work with one of the UK's biggest brands, to work with a customer base of around 1 million businesses that you interact with on a day-to-day basis, to have an organization that is genuinely mission and vision driven, that has real clear values on looking after its people. And then importantly, in the industry that we're talking about, we are looking for top talent, not just to raise the performance bar, but to also give that top talent opportunities to work on the latest and greatest technologies, opportunities. You know, we are able to invest in pushing the boundaries because of the brand that we are. So top talent can come into our organization, not just based on bringing their performance, but also to realize their own potential. So win-win opportunity, I think.
Yeah, I love that. So it's about them developing themselves and their own career. And this is an opportunity to do that.
Absolutely. And by doing so, develop the people around them and deliver incredible things for our customers. As I say, huge customer base there. So your efforts will result in work in product that people are using every day.
Amazing. Very, very exciting. Thank you very much.